Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. I'm June Rull. But before we get started, we wanted to extend our thoughts with those who are affected by the hurricane or family members that are in the path of Hurricane Michael. We're thinking of all of you. Today's webinar is going to be facilitated by Bonnie Gooden. And I'll have to say, Bonnie, I really like your title, talking about generations. So we're going to talk about traditionalists to Generation Z and today's adult education classroom. Bonnie's going to assist us as we explore the different generations and how the different generations affect learning and teaching in our classroom. I'm really excited to hear about this Generation Z, but I'm really interested to know what my new grandbaby is going to be named, what generation she'll be named after Generation Z. But before we get started, please note that all your attendee microphones are muted. We hope that you do interact with us today, and you'll do that via your Q&A section that's on your screen. Type in any questions or comments or anything that you'd like us to ask, and Bonnie will be answering those throughout the webinar. As in the past, today's webinar will be recorded, and you know that you can look for it in the archives on the IFDA website. So I'm going to let Bonnie take it over, and we're going to begin our webinar. Thank you, Bonnie, for this opportunity.
Thanks, June. Yes, we're going to talk all about the generations today. We're going to talk about who they are, what they are, and how they learn best. And we're going to talk a little bit about the differences and how that can be really a source of strength, both for us as instructors and our students, rather than being something that's frustrating. But we're also going to talk a little bit about how we engage these different generations and explore a few strategies that we can use. You know, if you're like me, and you've taught for more than 2 decades, you know better than most how education has really changed in that time frame. You know, what we used to have for chalkboards have been replaced by smart boards, and our textbooks often are online now. Lectures are videotaped or at least accessed through video. And let's face it, information and answers are just a click away. But you know, before we really go to that next step of understanding what we need to do, first of all, we have to look at the different generations that we're expected to teach, because of course in adult ed we are very special. We have all of them in one classroom. So as we look at this nice little chart here about the traditionalists and the baby boomers and the Generation X and Generation Y and Generation Z, we do know that each generation has distinctive attitudes, behaviors, expectations, habits, and of course motivational buttons. But you know, talking about generations isn't something that's brand new. In fact, I remember one of the first times I worked with a workshop on generations, we were just then talking about those Gen Xers coming in strong, not only into our classrooms, but as teachers, and something called Millennials that we really had no clue exactly what they would be. Now, I've just dated myself, June, so it is what it is. But what is a generation? It's approximately a 15 to 20 year time span, and those folks do share common characteristics. Their historical experiences, sometimes economic and social, technology, and some big society changes. Having said that, though, there's times that you know, maybe my generation is on the cusp of one to another. So I may have some characteristics that are more like a generation older or younger than me. Or maybe I don't fit everything. That's fine, because the bottom line is when we're looking at teaching the different generations, those generations continue to be more alike than different. But you know what? Before we get going, let's take a look. I'm going to have you answer some questions and find out what you think your generation is. Now, you'll notice on this nice little chart, we've got the greatest generation, and seldom do we see those students, of course, of course, in our classrooms anymore. And you'll also notice that what oftentimes we'll call traditionalists sometimes are also labeled the silent generation. Now, I have to share with you, my husband is part of the silent generation. He's on the cusp, and I have to say, there is nothing silent about him. But before we talk about them a little bit, I want you to take a look at these questions, and whichever question you answer yes will reveal your generation. So let's see. Were you born before, during, or a few years after World War I? If you did, then you are indeed part of that GI generation, that first one. Did you grow up during World War II or the Korean War and remember American Bandstand? If that's right in your memory, then you are indeed one of those traditionalist or silent generations. Do you remember the JFK and Martin Luther King assassinations or the Beatles getting together and breaking up as a child or young adult? If you do, just like June and me, you're a part of that baby boomer generation. Do you remember the Watergate scandal, the Challenger disaster, or MTV launching as a child or young adult? If those are really a part of your growing up, then you're a Generation X. Did you grow up during the 2000s? Do you remember a time when there was not a global war? If you do, then again, you are part of a whole another generation called the Millennials. Now, you know what? Our newest generation, we're not quite sure exactly what their trigger points are, but if you're in my audience today and you don't remember 9/11 actually happening, but rather what you remember is your parents or your grandparents talking about it, then you're probably that latest generation, Generation Z. So now you have an idea of who you are and where you're at in this whole bit. Please know as we go through, if you've got questions, comments, etc., just click into your Q&A because I'm going to have you do that right now. First, let's start with that generation called the traditionalists, and they were born somewhere around 1928 to 45. I want you to think about your classroom, either right now or in the past year or so. I'm sure you've had traditionalists in your classroom. When you think about those students, what word or words come to mind? And if you will for me, please share that word in the Q&A for me. I'm starting to see some words, June. We've got grandparents, seniors, conservative, octogenarian, hardworking. Some great words for the traditionalist. Anybody else? Rule-bound, investors. Those are really good words about traditionalists. In fact, rigid, technology challenged. The women wore slips and dresses. I hadn't even thought of that one. Steady and sure. Oh, you guys have lots of different ones. It's evident that you have indeed had traditionalist in your classroom. But let's take a look at a little more into it. Some of these words do look familiar. Traditionalists are noted for being loyal and hardworking. They were used to working within the system. Oftentimes, a traditionalist started working for one agency, continued to work for that agency until he or she retired. And there was that respect for authority or chain of command. In fact, even if you're a younger instructor, a traditionalist was more apt to call you Mr., Ms., Mrs. And back in time, what they saw were shows like the Lone Ranger. Their music was in the mood. Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Hound Dog, good old Golly Miss Molly. And as far as other things, their world very much was shaped by World War II. Some of them, the ones that were early, the Great Depression, the later ones, Korean War, and they listened to the news via the radio. Gosh, that seems almost so long ago. As we look at how traditionalists in your classroom learn, yes, they are a little bit rigid. They like that structure, those schedules, those procedures, and they do prefer lectures and printed materials. So if you're doing a project, they're the ones that want it in writing. They also feel rote memorization is important. That is indeed how they were taught to learn, and they're very much informational learners because of that. The other thing you need to know about traditionalists is that they do dislike being called on without notice. Now, as many of us being traditionalists are getting older, we also sometimes need a little extra time to retrieve all that information out. And they definitely appreciate recognition of hard work and the fact that they have paid their dues. So although we're having fewer and fewer traditional learners, it's still important that we want to retain them and we want to make sure that they have the most positive learning experience available to them. So remember that they are the kinds of folks that you need to tell them what to do. That is very much their learning style because they like that consistency. They like a step-by-step approach. They want those materials there in usually bulleted or outline form. This is really important. You don't think about that, but as some of us grow a little older, we may need that larger font type. There again, something that's a little easier for us to see. Also, it's hard to sit for 3 hours in a classroom, so a little more periodic movement for them, that little extra time. And I will tell you that as I remember the GED test was moving forward, and we had a number of instructors who were very, very concerned that their students just could not do the technology. Please know that although some are technophobic, this particular generation has the largest percentage increase in using technology. And oftentimes it's social media as they are following along their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So don't delete all technology. Just realize they need a consistent step-by-step. So that's a real brief overview of traditionalists and what they need. Okay, let me ask you, what kinds of things have you found worked very well with traditionalists, those folks who at this point are, gosh, about 73 and older? Think about your students. Any kind of strategy that you know really, really worked well with this particular generation? And as I'm looking at the question answer, it's real possible that, oh, let's take a quick look, June, at our chat. And what I do see there, and it's true, is a direct instruction approach. You are so correct. That is one of the things that works so well for, indeed, our traditionalists. Okay, let's head on to a generation that we still see a lot of, not only in the classroom, but also still in our instructors. So let me ask you this. Those baby boomers, those folks who were born between 46 and 64 that have been in your classroom, either last year or this year, what word or words come to mind when you think of those students? And here again, we're starting to get in lots of words. ARP, thank you. Practical, yes, they are very practical most of the time. Flexible, hippies. Somehow that doesn't quite fit with practical, but yes, they are and were hippies, focused, post-war generation.
I like the
Yeah.
happy-go-lucky group, Bonnie.
Yes, yes, very much so. Okay, June, if I had to ask you for a word that you think describes you in the classroom, what would you tell me?
Crazy.
Crazy. Okay, crazy. Conscientious, we have someone who said. Lack of rules. Yeah, we kind of lived with a time that didn't have as many rules. We're also clicking into they do like recognition, etc. Some great ideas. Let me look. Um,
And a real optimist.
yeah, yeah, we have lots of things there. Okay, some great ideas, guys. So let's take a look at what the research tells us. And the research does tell us that, the baby boomers here again, they are one thing to know about them is team oriented. They do enjoy personal sharing. If you've been with me, you know that I'm a storyteller and baby boomers are storytellers. In fact, I think my kids and grandkids have always numbered my stories. Oh, Mom, that's number 538. They're also workaholics. They believe in long hours, and if I do long hours, I have more self-worth. And that will come about in a different way in a little bit. But they do believe in change of command because they were, back in the time, the hippies, the peace movement. Um, their music, again, very different. We had the Beatles, we had the Rolling Stones, Creedence Clearwater Revival, everything from Blowing in the Wind to House of the Rising Sun. The world was very much shaped by Vietnam, civil rights movement, the assassinations of MLK, JFK, and RFK, Woodstock. I mean, everybody figured that anyone who grew up as a baby boomer went to Woodstock. The moon landing, the first nuclear power plant, and we had television. So we've gone from radio to television. That's what defines those of us who are baby boomers. How do we learn? We want things to fit into that big picture, and we definitely want recognition for doing well. A baby boomer is very team oriented and works well in groups. However, oftentimes in groups likes to take over. As a learner, we like to explore and analyze and look at different viewpoints and share those personal experiences. And we do follow instructions pretty well and are quite good with content. But there again, just like your traditionalist, we do like printed material. If you try to do a workshop with a whole group of baby boomers and you do not have a PowerPoint for them to follow along, they're not going to be happy with you because, again, they like that printed material. So what can you do in the classroom with baby boomers? Well, first of all, baby boomers really are the kind of folks who you need to show them what to do and make sure you give them time to practice those new skills. They do like to role play, but they need to be authentic role plays. And again, you need to make sure that you don't always let them lead those team projects because a baby boomer will take over. The other thing is baby boomers do like materials that have headings and that relative information underneath because remember, they're very content oriented. So we had traditionalists. Now we've added baby boomers to your classroom. I want you to think for a moment about your baby boomers. What is something that you do in the classroom that you find very effective when teaching baby boomers? And again, if you'll share, and June and I will take a quick look at what kinds of ideas that you've come up with. I think everybody's trying to figure out how baby boomers are a little bit different than traditionalists.
Got a few here, Bonnie. Writing outlines, used workbooks, collaborative problem solving, add music to teaching.
Those are great ideas, and they all work very, very well with baby boomers. You're exactly right. And it really is about having still, like with a traditionalist, more structure, But again, more availability to group learning than you may have done with just a pure traditionalist classroom.
I like
Okay.
this one, Bonnie. Provide handouts and highlighters.
Yes, we do understand the handouts. In fact, with this webinar today, each of you will have a handout that puts all of this together. So hopefully that will create some type of a venue for another learning style of a generation. You know, June, what I saw was the beginning of a whole new generation coming into not only our classroom, but as fellow teachers. And I am sure that we have a number of Gen Xers that are with us today. So if you were born in the area of 65 to 80, you're often termed a Gen Xer. So again, I want each of you to think about your classroom and think about those Gen Xers that you teach or have taught, and what word or words come to mind that describe those Gen Xers.
Driven.
Ah, I like that word. It's actually an excellent word for a Gen Xer.
We need some more to put
Yes, I do.
comments in the Q&A.
Determined.
Anxious, outspoken.
Not as loyal as baby boomers. That is true. Goal-oriented. Anything else? When you're teaching a Gen Xer, how is that going to be different?
Focus is coming up too, Bonnie.
It really is. Like to start ahead of others, technologically aware, some great ideas. I like that, like to start ahead of others. That will come forward too, as well as a couple of the other ideas. Great ideas, guys. Because you're right, the Gen Xers really showed a lot of difference from the baby boomers and the traditionalists before them, because those of you who are Gen Xers were the first latchkey kids. And you are very self-reliant and self-assured. You thought that you were an adult long before. But you're also the first generation that started seeking what we call a work-life balance. You saw no need to spend more than so many hours at work if the job was done. You saw no need to say to someone, gosh, I worked 60 hours last week. It didn't equate to your self-worth, but rather whether you created or whether you did what you were supposed to do. There is very much a self-command loyalty with Gen Xers. There again, less loyalty to the company or the organization. And if you take a look back in time, you were the generation of Sesame Street and the Pet Rocks and the disco and the Simpsons and the platform shoes and E.T. and MTV. Music, very different. Staying Alive, I Will Survive, Beat It, We're Not Going to Take It, and Bohemian Rhapsody. As you can see, technology really started entering in Generation X, and you were very much shaped by MTV, the Watergate scandal, Challenger. You knew where you were when Challenger happened. The fall of the Berlin Wall, in fact, the first chip was invented. And here again, you had things like John Lennon's assassination and the Valdez oil spill, all part of what guided you as you grew up. So, how do Gen Xers learn? Your learning style is very different than a baby boomer or a traditionalist. You are very task-oriented, and again, you're very self-paced and you like independent learning. As one of you said, you like to start first and get done. In fact, Gen Xers don't always like to come to class. They would prefer self-study. And so this is the first generation where we started seeing learners wanting to go online. The other thing is that comes because Gen Xers want control of their self and their time. Now, we do know Gen Xers like to learn new skills. They do see the need for the world changing, but they are very much focused on outcomes versus how they got there or the techniques. They like more informal learning environments, and they do believe very much that rewards should be based on productivity, not hours worked. In fact, one of the first times I did a workshop and was talking about Gen Xers, I had really talked about the fact that as a Gen Xer and how he or she likes best to learn, that person is very much into a more independent way of learning. And one of the gals came up during break and said, "Can you talk to my college prof?" And I said, "Okay, tell me what's going on." And she said, what was happening to her, she said, "I hate these groups that you have to work as a group and everybody's grade depends upon the group." She said, "Don't people understand that I want to do what I want to do and do a good job? I don't want to work within these very large groups." So very different. And when you start combining, you can probably see already, you may have a few issues if some teaching strategies aren't added for Gen Xers. So we need to remember that school life balance. We don't hold them for so many hours or so many semesters. We need to know that what they're doing really is necessary. In fact, sometimes Gen Xers are called the "why do I need to learn this" generation. Allow individual work for them and tap into those technology strengths of theirs. As for their opinion, I have two sons who are strong Gen Xers, and sometimes I don't even need to ask, they will give it, but they are a very opinionated group and they have some great ideas. It's really important as we start going not only from Gen Xers but forward that we use the most exciting material in those first few moments. If you're going to lecture, do it at the beginning and make it exciting, and then provide activities, etc., for the rest of the material. The other thing is to continually reiterate why students need to learn what they're learning, why it's important. So, June, what do you think? We've got three very diverse generations, don't you think?
Definitely. It's very interesting, Bonnie.
Well, then let's take a look at millennials. Millennials were born 81 to 97. And I do remember when they first started coming into the adult ed classroom, and it was like, oh my goodness. And at that point, we warned that at a time coming near you very soon, your classrooms would have more millennials in them than Gen Xers, baby boomers, etc. So for some of you, I am sure this has already occurred, that millennial students are indeed the largest group that you have right now. So here again, think about those millennials in your classroom and what word or words immediately come to your mind as you think about them and about them as learners. They desire to have fun and they're self-centered. Instant results. I can tell, June, that some of these folks definitely have millennials in their classroom. Computer maniacs. Family and friends and leisure life is more important, and it is. What else do you know about these millennials? Entitled. Me, me, me. In fact, sometimes they're called the me generation. And we have a couple self-centered. Technology-oriented. You guys know the millennials well, because they are often called that Peter Pan generation. They are a very sheltered and entitled generation and very much multitaskers. And these are the very first digital natives that we have. They have been plugged into technology since they were infants, and they have seen a very global world. They're extremely self-expressive. They love that immediate feedback, and they're master negotiators. If you've got a millennial in your classroom, don't be surprised if that millennial comes up to you and says, I know this is what you want me to do. However, I can do it this way and really show you. And, don't you like that idea? That's who millennials are. Back in time, they are the generation of reality TV and the selfies and the iPods and the iPads and the Facebook and the Twitter and the texting. And when you look at their music, Fallen, Viva La Vida, Lose Yourself, Hot in Here, How You Remind Me, Complicated, you know when your generation's removed from a generation, when you don't know the music. But when we look at millennials, their world very much was shaped by 9/11. A millennial remembers exactly where that millennial was during that happening. They understand that the World Wide Web was open to everybody, to the public, very much into some of the school things such as Columbine, the dot-com boom, and of course the war in Iraq, all things that have shaped the world of the millennial. So, how do millennials learn? They are very much the connect me to what I need. Don't tell me other stuff, just connect me to what I need. So they see that technology is viewed as a very essential life tool, and they are extremely culturally diverse. They're also a very idealistic generation. They're not going to accept that's the way it's always been done. They're going to push for change. From that aspect, a little bit similar to some of the things that baby boomers felt. The difference is that instant gratification where everybody gets a trophy. And that is coming back to haunt us who were parents and grandparents at the time. And that's why millennials need that instant gratification and the frequent rewards. As I said, they're master negotiators, and they'll take ownership of their classrooms. They don't feel that they shouldn't. And there again, they want engaging strategies. They don't feel a need for memorization. Why should I when I have technology? That's how millennials learn. Again, extremely different than the previous generation. So what can we do as an adult ed instructor? First of all, we do need to connect to our learners through social media. That's where they are at. And we need to include ways that they can customize the course. Don't hear me say they get to do everything. No, we need to provide that structured environment, but let's face it, there's some ways that we can customize our classrooms so that they can show the same basic knowledge, but in a different way. We need to provide things that are meaningful, not just do 5 pages of worksheets because they need to, but again, give them meaningful work. And group work. They do like to work in groups. The other thing is because they've been a sheltered generation, they're not always as secure as they would like to let you know. So consequently, don't take for granted that they know things. One of the things I've always found amazing is in adult ed, we anticipate everyone knows certain rules, regs, etc., and the way things work. A millennial will not ask you to explain. So make sure when they come into your classroom, they know what's expected and you give them that little bit of shelter more than sometimes you may some of the others. Definitely image rich versus only text, and chances to multitask. Even if I can't multitask, it doesn't mean that others cannot and take in all the information. So millennials are in your classroom in record numbers. What's a strategy that those of you in the field use that you're finding very effective working with your millennial students? And you can just keyboard in an idea. YouTube videos. Yes, they do much more learn by sometimes videos, and there's some great ones out there now. What's some other things you're finding work? Options for studying online, yes, very definitely. Although we saw this starting with Gen Xers, what we're seeing with millennials is much more of that. PowerPoints, Prezis, yes, definitely. And with lots of graphics. collaboration, great ideas, and these really are very positive ways for working with millennials. And don't veer out of our comfort zone regardless of the generation in which we were born. Anything else that people are finding? Be flexible and respect their ideas. I really like that because they do want respect very badly. And they feel like they've been adults since they were 1, 2, 3 years of age. So very much so. Be prepared to answer why. Yes. And don't think that they are questioning your authority, but they honestly want to know why they need to learn something. This is a student who will say, I know I'm getting ready for my GED test, etc., and you're going to be covering this, but tell me what that has to do with anything. Peer tutoring, a great idea. And constant feedback, yes, in lots of different ways. You're exactly right, and that's part of that, giving them shelter. Fantastic. Okay. We have a new generation. And these are our youngest learners. And so they're entering our program right now as we speak, and they're going to be entering in larger and larger numbers. And when I look at them, I really know that we have something a little bit different, and it is indeed called Generation Z. Just like with the millennials, we're not exactly sure of specific dates of beginning or ending, but right now, most folks are saying Generation Zs were born in 96 to 97, and we don't have an exact ending date. But it does tell you that some of these students, those 16 to 21-year-olds, are now in our adult ed classrooms. We may not see as many of them because we know our graduation rate continues to get better, but we're still going to see this newest generation coming in. So for those of you who have encountered this newest generation, which we're not even quite sure yet of their name, what do you notice about this generation that's a little bit different than the millennials? Okay, I see. I read the book iGen. Yes, it's a great book. Undisciplined. iPad, iPhone can be disrespectful. Short attention span, 8 seconds. There is a thing out there. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. They get bored very fast. Unreliable, lack of verbal communication, would rather text. Socially deficient. Some of those comments that you're making are very much a millennial as well. When we're looking at some things like the socially deficient and the unreliable, etc., very much for a millennial student. They do want it quick, and that is indeed, as we look at Generation Z. Let's take a little closer look, because when we're looking at the differences between millennials and Generation Zs, there really are some very major things going on here. First of all, they are technoholics, probably worse than or better than, it depends upon your perspective, of any previous generation. And it's not so much sitting at a computer as a handheld. They've got very low tolerance for non-digital resources. They are, though, much more respectful than millennials, and they do respect everyone based on equality, where everyone is equal. However, they do value their privacy. They are optimistic about the future, and they are very aware of impact on the planet. The interesting thing I find starts looking at some of the financial. The Generation Zs really have seen the previous generations having all of this debt for school. And so we see a little more of a frugal, now remember they're young yet, but a frugal generation. And so that will be interesting to see as we go forward. But the interesting thing is that they are going to outnumber previous generations. In fact, right now, about 27% of folks are Generation Z in 2018. These were the children or are the children of Generation X. Here again, we're not exactly sure what is going to shape their world, but we know the ongoing conflicts and the terrorism is definitely going to, the 24/7 technology, the fast access, the social media definitely will impact them. The debt of the previous generation will, and of course, cyberbullying. If you've ever been out to Beloit College, they always put forth a list for their teachers of incoming freshmen. And here's the list of incoming freshmen who really are the first strong Generation Z, iGen, Gen Z, Homelanders, whatever you want to call them, because they don't quite know their name yet. But if you're coming in, this is your world. Outer space has never been without human habitation. People loudly conversing with themselves in public are no longer thought to be talking to imaginary friends. Donnie and Marie, who? You've got mail. Sounds as ancient to them as number please would have sounded to their parents, the Generation Xers. When filling out forms, they're not surprised to find more than 2 gender categories to choose from. And they've grown up with stories about where their grandparents were on 11/22/63 and where their parents were on 9/11. Again, a very different generation. In fact, I went out and I thought, okay, let's take a little look for comic relief. And so, take a look. Does it look familiar?
I love the grandma one, Bonnie.
I don't know how many times that has been so true. Oh, they are so familiar as we go forward. In fact, if we really look at what we know about Generation Z now, and we've included in your pack at this time, a short little study that was done by Barnes & Noble College on Generation Z. But we know that their learning style has a high utilization of technology, lots. They are very visual. They're very dependent thinkers. They're very hands-on, and they find social media not to be a distraction. In fact, just to give you an idea with the hands-on and the hands held, I was working with the grandson this summer who was taking a course online, and he needed some assistance, and he was doing the course on his handheld. And I'm going, okay, if you're going to have me help you, I need to at least have the computer screen. I said, how do you do it on on your phone? He was having no problem, and again, I guess if grades are any indicator of that, he really had no problem with it. But that is very different for those of us who really like the paper pencil, etc. This is a huge change for us. And here again, if I'm looking at the Generation Z, remember that, I hate to say it, but their brain makeup is different because of the way they've learned. So Generation Z, very hands-on. They prefer to learn by doing rather than being told what to do or by reading a text. In fact, when you're looking at it, and some of the studies have said only 12% of this generation likes to learn by listening. They are not strong auditory. 38% by seeing, and 51% by doing. So they are a much more hands-on generation than we've seen. You've said it before, they like fast delivery of content. They prefer random access and choice. They are pretty decent problem solvers, and they learn more effectively when they're left to do this and find solutions on their own. I hate to say it, but listening to lectures is torture for them. And so we need to, again, go back to that strategy of the most interesting stuff first, and remember small bites. Now, it's not a spectator sport for them. Here again, they like to be involved as they go forward. So, New generation, they are very much the engage me and let me be a part of the process. And if we can get that down, we're going to have some great learners. So what are some tips? Become that learning guide. Think about how you communicate with this generation. Break it up. Nothing new to us, but you do need to make information more graphics and more digestible. We do need to continue, and this is just good teaching. It's nothing for a generation, but we have to have that variety and pace into our lessons. And if we aren't already, we need to think more digitally. We have to use things that are used not only by this generation, but also in the workplace, in our world of work. So we need to let our students use technology. Do we need to monitor it, etc.? Yes. And the other thing is speed of access. Again, a study not too long ago found that for this generation and the oldest of the millennials, they read about 20% of a text, and they spend about 4.4 seconds for every 100 words on a page. So if that's what they're going to read, we need to make sure that they've got strong reading skills and they understand when they can do that to get the basic information and when they need to go that next step. And because this world is changing, we've got to continue to create new challenges. Very, very different. And again, it's going to take some work. In fact, this is me talking, but that is so true. Give a small child a regular play truck and he or she will first thing will say, where are the batteries? We have definitely gotten to that point. But Generation Z, I find to be an exciting generation because they're very much a sharing generation. They want to share, they were born to share, and so as a teacher, if we listen and respond to them and encourage them to share, we create a positive atmosphere. They do research a lot. Let them do research and then let them share what they have. They need what we call high-octane engagement. Some game mechanics are good. In fact, in the last workshop that IPDAY is doing, they're doing some very basic games, and all of us enjoy doing those, whether we are a Generation Z, a baby boomer, etc. They are visual. We become a very visual world, so as you're building lessons, we need to make sure we do more visual content. Now, I know that this is a new generation for all of us, but let's take a look at what kinds of things can you do? And I'm going to respond. There is a thing, a chat going back to the previous slide, and I'm not quite sure what slide that was, but I will tell you that all of these slides are in your handout, are downloadable from Florida IPDAY. So if there was some information on that that you just wanted to write down or access, know that you'll have that. If it's something that you would like to ask a question of, please, ask it and we'll click back. But having said that, one last time, Generation Z, these brand new students who are basically your 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, what things are you finding in the classroom that are either frustrating or are working well? Working well, math, video games, Khan Academy. Answering questions as a group out loud. Both great. Finding some are slow starters, and that could very well be depending upon them. Answering questions as a group out loud. Great ideas. Small groups. Opportunities to connect to their peers. Yes. Collaboration, creativity, choices. We all like to have choices. And you're right, some don't have the self-motivation and complacent. Having been in this field for a lot of years, I've actually found that in all generations. Any other ideas? experiential learning, very much so. And of course, we know that that works well with all. They want to do the learning. That is a really true statement. When you try to sometimes get a Generation Z to do it with you, you may get from them, just let me do it, because they do want to do it. They are independent that way, and they do have a way for problem solving and doing, which is a very positive thing. And I do understand sometimes technology use can be frustrating in the classroom. That's why sometimes there needs to be some rules, some regs, but we can't downplay the fact that these younger students, and of course maybe some of our more mature, are very much into being able to learn and being able to multitask. Okay. Some great ideas. I think if you can really highlight, though, with this generation, they're a much calmer generation than millennials were by and large, and they are a more wanting to change and not being quite as me-oriented. However, it's still a little too soon to really figure that out. So let's just, for a moment, bring it together. Remember that we, at least most of us in our classroom, have 5 different types of learners. We have those traditionalists who tell me what I want to do or what I should do. We have the baby boomers who like that facilitated interaction, show me what to do. The Generation X, more independent. Why do I need this? The millennials who like that collaborative and network, connect me to what I need. And then Generation Z, who is more engage me, let me be part of that process, very mobile, very internet based. But there again, we've got all these generations in the classroom. So how can we bring out the best of all of them? Recognize and celebrate those differences and find ways to create those values. Focus on productivity, teamwork, and relationships, and challenge assumptions and raise awareness so that students understand that each of them may learn just a little differently. Important that we don't stereotype, that we don't judge capabilities by attire or work hours, that we don't miss opportunities, and we just have to sometimes be careful that we don't make offensive remarks. We may not think of them as offensive, someone else may. When somebody tells me that, older folks don't know anything about technology, I bristle. I'm one of those older folks. I think I know something about technology. But it's also important that we match our own teaching style to the learning styles, generation styles of our students. I am very much a visual learner. Give it to me in print. My auditory's poor. My hands-on aren't as good. If I've entered a classroom now filled with hands-on learners, I need to make sure that how I am teaching matches how they are learning. And again, this is just good strategies. We need to change those activities often. Even before we start talking about the 8-second rule, the typical adult attention span is about 10 to 15 minutes. So we need to do that, make sessions interactive, and integrate technology with non-technology. We can't do a full tech class. We can't do a full reading and writing class. We do need participation from everyone, and the why, that real world application of why I need to know something. And I think this last thing for all of us is probably the most important, that we're open to that continuous change. The world is changing quickly, and so is education. So is the way our students learn, and thus the way that we teach. So where do we get started? Oh, there's so much stuff out there. All you need to do is a Google search, and all of a sudden you have more information than you knew what to do with. But let's get you started. You have, as part of your resources, a packet that just provides a few things to get you started. And if you're like me, sometimes I like to see everything put together. So in your workbook or your guide, you have a quick overview of the generations in chart format, which should appeal more to my Gen Xers. Just giving those big ideas, profile of each of those generations, some defining events, communication media, their approach to learning, and then a couple articles that I hope you find interesting, one on the millennials, and then one on Generation Z. Just a basic short articles on what works when you're working with students, what works against you with students of those ages, since, let's face it, they are the primary focus of our classrooms in adult education at this point. The other thing you'll have in the workbook guide are a few things of preferences and learning styles, again, just across the generations. And I think when you start looking at them, you go, oh, this doesn't look quite as bad as I thought it would. But it does give preferences. And again, the next chart puts it all together with some instructional ideas and strategies. Last but not least, I think the important thing for all of us to remember is we're teaching these generations. And as June started out, a brand new grandbaby, let's face it, we're not sure what generation that child is going to be or what is going to be different. But what I do know for sure is that there's no way we can teach all generations, all strategies for one activity. So we do need to mix it up. We need to look at our materials, we need to look at our presentations, and we need to make sure that they are inclusive of the needs of all the generations rather than say, oh my goodness, I have this lesson plan, now I need an activity for the traditionalist, an activity for, no. We would all drive ourselves batty doing that. The important thing is to focus on real world situations where all students, all generations have strategies in differing activities that work for them. And Roger Allen, I think, said it best when his final word was, in case you're worried about what's going to become of the younger generation, it's going to grow up and start worrying about the younger generation. It happened as my parents and grandparents said about us hippies. What in the world is this world coming to? And the same thing that we are often saying about the younger generations, and they're going to do just fine. We celebrate their diversity. We celebrate the fun that is adult education. So having said that, June, let's take a quick look at a few of our comments before we end today. We have a number of comments about, the computer programs really work well, and you're right. Some of those things are great. Learning style the same as differentiation and universal design of learning. Great question. And yes, all of these things work together. And so sometimes semantics get in the way of calling them different things. But yes, we do have. The only thing I'd say that I would comment is we do need to make sure that all of us in adult education do enter the digital world, because it isn't going away for us. Okay, and one more time, all of these materials, the charts that are in the workbook, as well as the full PowerPoint, and one short handout about Gen Z, are on the Florida IPDA website where you can download them. Any other questions or comments? I do have one question I'm going to answer, and it's because I have done a lot of research into it, and is, do I think that critical thinking skills of students today have diminished in comparison to 20 years, 40 years ago? So why? What's the remedy? I'm going to use the word problem solving. And what I'm finding is that today's students, and I base this on working with students that age, and I base it on personal experience with grandbabies. I am finding that high school students today have stronger problem-solving skills than I did, but they're different than the way I learned. They are different in processing. So I don't think critical thinking and problem-solving skills have decreased, gone away, but I do think they approach problems differently than we do. They approach critical thinking differently than we do. The younger generations are masterful in research and going out on the web, much better than I ever was at that age. With card catalog systems. But again, it is a different way that our students are being taught, and when, rote memorization is so much less than it ever was before because of the massive amount of information. So having said that, June, I think that we are ready to finish up, and you guys have been a great group today. I am so pleased to have been with you. June, I think we've got one last thing for them to do.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Before we close out today's webinar, would you take just one more minute of your time to answer these 3 short survey questions? They're on your screen now, so just go ahead and answer them quickly. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to thank you again for participating today, and I hope that you'll join us on our next webinar, which is scheduled for October 17th. Daphne Atkinsons from GED Testing Service will be our facilitator, and I know you won't want to miss out on this webinar. Daphne's going to walk us through the features of the score report and how we can use that report to better assure that we get outcomes for our students. So tune in next week. We'd love to have you all back again. Until then, we wish you all a great rest of the day. And Bonnie, thank you so much.
Thank you.